Hello and welcome to PMCLounge.com. In this video, we are talking about the project management principles. So, if you're aware of the PMBOK Guide Edition 7, if you're aware of PMI, PMP, you might know that the PMBOK Guide essentially contains 12 project management principles and 8 performance domains, right? Now, important to note, I've mentioned this earlier, I'll repeat it here, that the PMBOK Guide Edition 7 is essentially a combination of two sub-books. First is the guide, of course, the PMBOK Guide, 7th edition, and second is the standard for project management. So this document right here is made up of two books. We have made a lot of videos covering everything that there is to know about the standard for project management. Check out the second link in the description for the entire playlist, because the first link is going to take you to an article over at our official website pmclounge.com, which essentially talks about the 12 project management principles. And we are not covering all the principles in this video because then it would become a 5-hour long video. We are just taking an overview. What's important to note though is, and also the reason why I reminded you about the two subbooks, it's the fact that 12 project management principles are part of the standard for project management. All right, let's move on. Let's understand the project management principles. Basically, let's take an overview of this topic. Now, to begin with, what is a principle? What do you mean when somebody says principle? So, principle is essentially, as per Wikipedia, a principle is a proposition or value that is a guide for behavior or evaluation. So, you're essentially giving some sort of guidance when we talk about principle. But what's more important is, as you dig deep and read more about principle on Wikipedia, you will see that it is a substantive and collective term referring to rule of governance. Now, the absence of which is considered a character defect. And I would really want you to take a look at these bold words. The absence of a principle could be considered a character defect. So, this is important. This becomes important because now what we are essentially saying, we are essentially underlining the importance that a principle has. And we have 12 such principles in project management. Now, we already talked about Wikipedia, but let's do the actual study. What project management principles are? And principles for a profession, and we are talking about a profession here because we are talking about project management principles, right? So we have seen general principles, but for the project management profession, principles serve as a foundational guidelines for any kind of strategy that you are going to make in your projects, any kind of decision making, any kind of problem solving. So, anytime you're doing one of these three, you will look at your principles, and these principles are basically going to give you some sort of guideline as to how you can proceed. Now, principles are the basis of professional standards and methodologies. Now, some time ago, I just showed you the PMBOK guide, right? And it has the standard for project management. If we go back to the slide, and what we are talking about here is that principles are the basis of professional standards. Now, PMBOK guide itself is actually a standard. And principles are also the basis for methodologies. Something like a Prince 2 is actually a methodology, and Prince 2 also has certain principles. Anyways, we are not discussing Prince 2 principles here, but I thought it would be important for you to understand how principles are the basis for professional standards like the PMBOK guide and even methodologies like your Prince 2 methodology. These are non-prescriptive and these are also broadly based, right? So, okay, let's move on. Before we go further, I'd like to remind you about our program Project Management for Non-Project Managers. If you're not a project manager, you can check out this program. Head over to pmclounge.com/pm for non-PM. Okay, let's talk about the project management principles. There are 12 such principles. First is be a diligent, respectful, and caring steward. Second is create a collaborative project team environment. Now, I just wanted to take a pause here and let you know that the reason you are seeing these principles defined in such a broad term is deliberate, right? These are defined in a way that is broad so that individuals and organizations can follow. The absence of not being a respectful and a caring steward for you as a project manager can be looked upon as a character defect. I'd like to take you back to that slide where we talked about how the absence of principles can be taken up as a character defect, right? Effectively engage with stakeholders, focus on value, recognize, evaluate, and respond to system interactions, demonstrate leadership behaviors. You, as a project manager, are essentially required to do all of these, anyways, right? But still, these are principles that we must abide by, we must know, right? Tailor based on context, build quality into processes and deliverables, navigate complexity, optimize risk responses, embrace adaptability and resilience, enable change to achieve the envisioned future state. So these are essentially the 12 project management principles. But how did PMI come up with these 12 principles? How were these 12 decided upon, right? That is an interesting story which I want to tell you now. So how did these project management principles came about? So there's this global community of project management practitioners. If you're a project manager, you too are part of that community. So this community was engaged, and this community came up with these principles. Now, these practitioners that we are talking about, they represented different industries, different cultural backgrounds, different organizations. There could be a difference in their roles as well, right? And the kind of experience that they had, the kind of projects that they were working on. So there were multiple rounds of feedback involving this global project management community, and based on these feedback, 12 principles were finalized, and these 12 principles essentially provide the guidance for project management. An important point to note here, though, is that since these 12 are just guidance, the degree to which these are applicable to your specific project is basically based on the context of your project, the kind of stakeholders you're dealing with, the kind of project you're dealing with, right? So these are just broad based 12 project management principles. These are guidelines that you should follow. The absence of these are going to result in a character defect. So these should be present, but to what degree these are applicable to your project is something which is open for interpretation. Now, one last thing, these principles, the 12 principles that we talked about, these may overlap, but they are consistent. So, none of these 12 principles that we just talked about, none of these are going to contradict each other. That is an important point to know. All right. So, you might now be thinking about the PMI code of ethics. If you have ever read about or studied about your PMP exam, or just went over the PMI code of ethics, you might think that how are these principles different from the PMI code of ethics? And that is what I want to cover in this slide here. So, code of ethics, they could be related to morals as well. But these principles, they may or may not reflect morals. So, this is a single line difference between code of ethics and the principles. Now, code of ethics, they can be adopted to establish a moral conduct for individuals or for a profession, for organizations, right? You can use the PMI code of ethics and you will be able to establish a moral conduct. But the same may or may not be applicable to project management principles. The PMI code of ethics and professional conduct is basically based on these four values: responsibility, respect, fairness, and honesty. These are the four values that essentially the entire code of ethics is based on. Finally, let's also talk about the project management principles and general management principles. Because if you go back and take a look at the 12 project management principles that we just talked about, you might think that, some of these are applicable to general management as well. I need not be a project manager. I could be, let's say, an operations manager, and some of these principles are applicable to me too, which is absolutely correct. Both projects and business focus on delivering value. So it is natural that there will be an overlap between project management principles and general management principles. Focus on value is actually one of the 12 principles. Now, obviously, the methods that are used by a project manager to manage projects is definitely going to be very different from someone who's running day to day operations and essentially managing operations. But the underlying principles could be same. So that's all that we had in this video. I hope you were able to understand how the project management principles came about and what are their significance. Like, share, subscribe. If you like our work, consider contributing by using the thanks button on YouTube or heading over to pmslounge.com/contribute. Don't forget to check out our website, pmslounge.com, your number one free project management and PMP resource. Thank you and have a nice day.